Welcome to Triathlon 101, a beginner's guide to triathlon, an endurance athlete journey podcast series. I'm your coach for this journey, and if triathlon has ever felt confusing, intimidating, or out of reach, that's exactly why this series exists. You don't need to be fearless, you don't need to have perfect fitness, and you definitely don't need to have everything figured out yet. What you need is a clear plan, honest guidance, and the confidence that comes from taking the right steps in the right order. In this series, we'll strip away the hype, focus on smart progression, and help you build confidence before distance so that triathlon fits into your life, not the other way around. Whether this is your first race or your first time even considering one, you're in the right place. Let's get to work. Welcome, everyone, to the Triathlon 101 series. I'm your host, Coach Justin. I'm owner and coach of Tabula Rasa Racing and one of the co-hosts of the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. I wanted to bring the beginner series to introduce the sport of triathlon and answer some important questions that a lot of new athletes are asking as they're looking to get into the sport. So I wanted to bring a series that kind of breaks down some of the answers to these questions and bring in some of my experience as a coach and endurance athlete myself and how I approached my journey and things that I recommend to my athletes. So this is episode 1 of the series, and today we're going to be discussing the question, what distance should you start with in the sport? This can be kind of an overwhelming question between pressures from social media, external pressures, even internal pressures, and the quote-unquote Ironman culture can make it look like starting off long is the best approach. But to be quite honest with you, I don't believe that is always the case. So today we're going to discuss how we want to approach our journey and some of the other supplemental questions that you should ask yourself in order to answer this one question. So let's start off with, this series is going to be focused on those endurance athletes who want either some kind of like long-term success. This is not an instant gratification kind of series. And so if you are one of these athletes who is just, this is just on your bucket list and you are a one and done kind of athlete, then answering this question is irrelevant, because the answer to the question is going to be whatever it is that you want to do in order to satiate this desire to check the box on your bucket list. But if you are looking at this sport and you don't know if you're going to like it, but you just want to try it out, but you do have an interest in endurance sports, then this is a serious question that you should consider and one that should take some significant amounts of thought. So let's start off with the short answer to this question, and then there's a longer kind of what I'll call the real answer to the question. The simple recommendation is to start off with the shortest distance that allows you to build confidence and longevity, if longevity is one of the things that you would like to achieve. But so let's just start off with whatever that distance is that allows you to get a glimpse into what the sport is like and the process that you will be going through in preparation for the race. If you think that there may be future races, then start off with the shortest distance. Quite honestly, that is, I think, the best approach. But the real answer to the question is going to come from different factors that we also have to consider, is things like, what's your background? What are the goals that you have and your lifestyle outside of the sport? So day-to-day life, those 3 things I think are 3 of the biggest factors that will determine what distance you should pick from. I tend to see triathlon as a long-term journey. The reason that I see it that way is because that's kind of how my journey went through. I can tell you right at the start is I am a gastric bypass patient. So I had weight loss surgery probably over 12 years ago now. And I always kind of wanted to be a runner. And so once I had my surgery and I started to lose weight, I started running. And then one of my coworkers, one of the jobs that I had years and years ago, suggested a multi-sport event. And so he said, "Hey, there's a small triathlon that's in my area. That might be something that you'd be interested in." I had never even considered the sport of triathlon because I was just focused solely on running at that time. So I went back to the office after lunch and kind of punched it up on the computer and just checked it out. And I was like, you know what? That does sound pretty interesting. And so I went ahead and registered like right then and there, not really knowing kind of like what I was in for, how to approach the training for it. I didn't do any due diligence. I was just kind of impulsive about it. But, you know, the distance that I signed up for was one that I knew that I could accomplish. And so I went with the shortest distance that was available to me. And so I said, let's just see how this sport's going to fit into my lifestyle, if it meets my expectations, if I enjoy the process. Because if you don't enjoy the process, quite honestly, you're not going to stick with it. So, it's just going to be, well, I tried it, didn't like it. And that's a completely reasonable approach to go through. So let's talk about the various distances that you have to pick from. So I'll put up a graphic and we're going to have what's called the super sprint, which is it's the shortest of the distances. Then you have a sprint, an Olympic. Sometimes the Olympic is referred to as the international distance. And then there's the half Ironman, or sometimes it's called the medium distance or moderate distance, or quite commonly known as the 70.3. And then you have the full distance, the full Ironman, which is the 140.6. So those are your standard race distances that you have to pick from. However, within those, you have different options that you can select as well. So one of the things that I did in my very first race is I wasn't comfortable with the swim. I knew how to swim, but it was just new enough to just kind of like splash in the water as a kid. It wasn't like I knew repetitive swimming methods. So I said, you know what? I'm going to do a duathlon, which was a run first, bike, and then run again. And I said, I just want to try that because I definitely know that I'm not comfortable in the pool. I don't have enough time to learn how to swim and be comfortable with it, but I know how to run and I know how to ride a bike. So let's just see if I enjoy the multi-sport event. When I finished that race, I was instantly hooked. I knew that this was something that I was really going to enjoy. And so I said, well, now I'm going to sign up for a sprint. But I'm going to do the full sprint. So I wanted to learn how to swim. So I actually spent like 3 months in the pool trying to learn how to swim. But I'm going to save that for future episodes where we'll talk about swimming and its role within the sport of triathlon. But, I did just cover the various distances that you have to pick from. But within those, you have other options to select from as well. You have typical like duathlons. You have aqua bikes. An aqua bike is going to be an event where you swim and cycle, and then there's no run. So you're done after that. You also have relay options where you can put together a team of 2 to 3 athletes, and one of you can swim, bike, and the other one can bike, another one can run, or you can have one person that does multiple. Sometimes you'll find one person who will swim and bike, and then you have a runner. It could be that, the person that doesn't want to run or they can't run because of injuries or whatever. So they still want to compete. So they'll swim and bike, and then they'll find somebody else to run that leg of the race. So long course racing is just, while it's inspiring, it may not always be appropriate early on in the journey. I've had multiple conversations with various athletes that they'll come to me and, say, hey, I want to do a full, having never done a triathlon at all. And so while I don't want to discourage somebody from walking that path, I do make sure that they have a firm understanding and a firm grasp on what they're about to take on. And I know that for me, starting off at the longer distances, there's a lot that I learned during the process of building up to a full a full distance triathlon that I'm glad I took that time to learn. There's way more than just, executing workouts and learning how to bike and learning how to run. There's, nutrition that you have to figure out, and there's pacing that you have to, trial and error and figure that out and how it fits into it. And, how to juggle other aspects of your life along with the training so that you feel prepared, and that you will enjoy the race day. So what I tend to urge new athletes is that approach your first race as a learning experience and not just a stress test, just to see, can I do this? I have a feeling that most of the time, what you'll find is the athletes may not really enjoy the journey of preparing for a longer distance race if it's their first ones. And their enjoyment of race day, I think, can be hindered and lessened by not having previous experiences to draw on. And it's kind of like if you're just getting your driver's license, and your first car is a Porsche. It's just like you start off right up at the top, and rather than going through the process of like, hey, we all have to drive crappy cars when we first start off. So, we kind of build up to it. You find cars that kind of fit your budget, fit your lifestyle, fit your driving experiences. And, eventually you can work your way up. I think of triathlon as the same kind of approach. There's things that we want to learn. There's nuances of the sport that we have to kind of figure out. If you're not single, there's other people that are involved in this process as well, because you do not race alone. When you do this sport, you bring others with you, regardless of whether they're racing or not. So, if you're married or if you have a significant other, those people are investing in your journey just as much as you are. Spectating some of these races can be an all-day event. And so this is a significant undertaking. There can be sometimes sacrifices that you have to make along the way. It's like your free time could be significantly limited the longer distance race that you pick, because more of your time is going to be spent preparing for this long endurance event. So starting off with a shorter distance may be more manageable, just so that you kind of see how it fits into your life. I'd much rather say, hey, if we're doing a sprint, can you dedicate the next 8 weeks to training about anywhere between, let's say, 5 to 8 hours a week? I think that's pretty manageable, if you ask me. So telling somebody who's never done this before and that they're going to sign up for a full distance triathlon, hey, can you manage anywhere between 16 to 20 hours a week of training? And that's just executing workouts. That doesn't include the stuff that you would spend for recovery, trying to make sure that your body stays healthy, whether that be food prep or, stretching and rolling and compression and percussion therapy and massages and all that. That's not included. So I'd much prefer to encourage somebody to start off at the lower end, just so that they get a glimpse of what it's like. And then they can make that decision. It's like, okay, well, that was fairly easily executed in terms of, hey, I was able to do my workouts. I didn't have to sacrifice that much in my normal life outside of training. And so it kind of fit. And you can make that decision. It's like, I do have some extra time. I think that there's other stuff that I can do, that I can sacrifice in order to spend more time and devote more time to training. So let's step up a distance. I think that's a pretty reasonable and responsible approach to the sport and its introduction. So why the distance choice matters to beginners. Sometimes there are risks that are involved with starting off too long, especially if you don't have a whole lot of experience in endurance sports or one of the disciplines of triathlon. So I'm under the assumption that you know what the components of a triathlon are. So maybe I should not make that assumption. So there is a swim component, there is a bike component, and then there is a run component. You do all of these within the same event on the same day. And so you'll swim and then you'll get out of the water, then you'll go into an area, you'll change out of, like, if you have wetsuits and all that kind of stuff, you'll get onto your bike and then you'll go out for a bike ride. And then you'll come back and now you'll rack your bike up on the rack and then you'll put your run shoes on and you'll go out for a run. So one of the things that I find with athletes is they are fairly comfortable with the bike thing. You know, most kids have ridden bikes. So there is an understanding on, what it's like to ride a bike. Running is fairly self-explanatory. It's really not that hard. It's just whether your body can endure the demands of running. That seems to be kind of the key to that question. Swimming, on the other hand, is where many athletes are anxious about the sport. They don't know how to swim. They have a fear of the water. It is by far the most technical part of the triathlon, of the three disciplines. So it is hard, and it's definitely harder to pick up as an adult or as an older athlete. So the swim anxiety tends to keep people away from the sport itself. And if you decide to kind of, like, quote unquote, jump into the deep end of the pool and pick a long distance race, that can be a significant undertaking because it's the first thing that you do that day. So you don't want to set your day up to be completely overwhelmed and just gassed as soon as you get out of the water, because now you still have two more things that you have to execute. You have to execute a bike and a run. So preparation for it, even though it's the shortest distance, requires still a significant amount of time invested. One of the other factors on when it comes to why distance matters is the time that you have to dedicate to the preparation and where you have to pull that time from. Whether you are married or you have kids, you have a demanding job, there's all kinds of different factors. Do you want to sacrifice nights out with friends or, date nights with your significant other sometimes? And so there are other things that you have to consider. Do you travel a lot for business? Well, traveling can make training challenging, especially because there's so much gear that's involved with the sport. You have bikes and trainers and shoes and swim goggles and wetsuits and all kinds of other stuff that you have to consider. When it comes to traveling for business, it makes it challenging. And so, I think the last one that I would bring in is there can be burnout, just a mental burnout, because training for a full distance triathlon can be anywhere between 9 and 12 months, depending on your current level of fitness, your experience, your history in the sport, whether you're completely new or if you have any previous injuries that you have to consider. Training for a full distance triathlon can, like I said, be anywhere between 9 to 12 months, whereas a sprint can be like 8 weeks, 8 to 12 weeks, 12 weeks max if, you want to spend extra time kind of like learning the swim piece, which is where most people need the extra time to get that comfortability in the water. And whether you're preparing for a triathlon that has a pool swim versus an open water swim, if it's open water, is it a lake? Is it a river? Is it an ocean swim? There's all kinds of different factors that you have to consider when picking a race and picking the distance so that you know how to prepare for it. Sometimes these longer distance races, because it's such a long commitment of training, it's hard to stay engaged for 9 to 12 months of training. So unless you're kind of like bought into the process, which makes that commitment and motivation a little bit easier to tolerate and palatability, picking a shorter distance race where you're only training from like 8 to 12 weeks is a little bit easier to manage, and staying engaged and motivated. A lot of times what you'll find is that it's easier to stay engaged for these shorter distance races because you're learning so much within those 8 to 12 weeks. There's a lot of stuff that you're figuring out. Maybe there's some stuff that you're not quite figuring out, and, constantly having to come back to it and try and over and over and over again can be a little bit frustrating. It can lead to a little bit of burnout. But if you're only saying it's like, hey, I'm going to spend the next 8 weeks to kind of learn how to swim. I know how to bike and I know how to run. I got to put them all together on race day, but I really need to find that comfortability in the water. Then it's easier to manage that shorter commitment. So let's go into sometimes what I find is athletes pick a race distance purely based on ego. And, they say, hey, I want to be an Ironman. So my first race that's what I'm going to do. Sometimes I find it challenging to convince somebody. It's like, hey, maybe we should start a little bit further back and start with a shorter distance. If you like it, the Ironman is still going to be there. Who's to say that if you do the sport, you do your shorter distance race and you like it, then yeah, by all means, let's jump in and let's do a longer distance race. But you don't know until you kind of have that first exposure. A lot of people either really, really love it or they really hate it. Sometimes it's hard to find those lukewarm people. They're just like, I don't really know if I like it. Usually you kind of know after that first race is done. So that was my experience. It tends to be the experiences that I hear from other athletes as well that I talk to. They either knew that they were going to like it because, they've crossed that finish line and they're just like, yeah, I'm in. Let's go. I did talk with an athlete one time when he was kind of getting into the sport and he wanted to kind of jump right into an Ironman. And, I was talking with him and age was his main concern, is that he wanted to be able to execute that distance of a race while he felt like he still could. And, sometimes, if you're getting up into, your late 40s, your early 50s, maybe there is a concern on, would I be able to execute this type of commitment? The older that I get, it's a little bit harder to recover from training. What are the demands of training going to do to me? And so it's better to try and like get that experience while you still physically can. I can tell you now that the guy is still in the sport. He did his Ironman. He had a little brief exposure to maybe some shorter distance race while he was training for that full, but he's still in the sport. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with, hey, let's start off a little bit slower maybe, and let's see if we're going to like this, because I think that there's something to momentum. So if you finish that first race and you feel like it was successful, then it's easier to go into your second race with more confidence. You understand the training a little bit more. You have a little bit more appreciation for the time that's spent preparing. And so, that builds momentum. And I think that is a very valuable piece of the puzzle to endurance sports. Sometimes if you don't have that momentum, it's really hard to get it. And it's really hard to keep going if you find that you're just kind of like frustrated all the time and you just feel beat up all the time. That can wear on you and you kind of lose the confidence. You lose those positive feedback loops and your momentum. And so it makes the journey even harder. So one of the things that I would say is the quote unquote impressiveness of going long, of doing a longer distance race. People seem to have the impression that, oh, well, I did an Ironman, and so people are going to be impressed with that. It's impressive. Quite frankly, what I find to be more impressive is the preparation that went into race day. If you are consistent, you executed a plan, you endured those long sessions, even when you didn't want to do it, but you still showed up day after day. You did all the other small stuff to keep going, the recovery stuff, the PT stuff when needed, all those other pieces of the puzzle. The execution of the training to me is far more impressive than the fact that you did the race. And the reason is because race day is one day. Training for race day can span weeks and months. And to me, that is more impressive than the distance that you pick from, how fast you are, or whatever. You know, those things are nice, but I think that there's more to it than that. So let's kind of dive into a little bit on athletic background. We have to take that into consideration when picking a race distance. Is like, what are some of your strong suits? What are some of your quote unquote weaknesses? So let's just say that if you have experience as a runner, but you really don't have any experience in cycling and swimming, then I would say it's more suitable for you to start off with the sprint. The reason that I say that is by the time you get to the run, you've already swam and biked. So the run isn't going to feel like a run. You're not running fresh like you're used to. You're running under fatigue, which can yield a very different experience. So even strong runners who get into the sport of triathlon, they tend to get a little bit discouraged because they can't run like they think that they can, or they believe that they should based on their expectations on past races. So starting off with the sprint and kind of learning how to run under fatigue is highly valuable. So I would consider starting off with the sprint. If you're a fairly strong cyclist, you have quite a bit of experience on the bike, maybe not so much on the run and not so much as a swimmer, then I would consider, okay, you can do the sprint. However, you could consider starting off with an Olympic or international distance based on how much experience you have as a cyclist. So it's something to consider. Like if you're very, very comfortable on the bike, then maybe you could consider starting off with an international distance or an Olympic distance. If you're a swimmer and you really don't have a whole lot of experience on the bike or on the run, then start off with the sprint. I will say that you will have a significant leg up on most of your other competitors, because I think that most of the people that are kind of entering the sport, they're not entering in with a big background of swimming. So you have a leg up. So you're able to start the race with less accumulated fatigue when you get out of the water than many of your other competitors. So you may have a good shot at performing pretty well, given you have the time and ability to focus on cycling and running during your training. But I would say as a swimmer, you have an advantage over many of the other competitors. So yeah, if you're new to endurance sports and you don't have any experience, you could consider a super sprint, which is even shorter, a shorter distance than the sprint. To be quite honest, I don't see a whole lot of super sprint races. They're pretty hard to find. And so you may have a challenging time locating that kind of distance. But what you could do if you're brand new to the sport, do something like what I did and find a sprint distance race, but pick the event, the pieces that you're good at. So let's say if you're comfortable in the water and on the bike, but you're not necessarily comfortable as a runner, then pick a sprint and do an aqua bike, or pick a duathlon if you don't have a whole lot of confidence in the water and you have some significant hurdles there. Then if you can find a race that has that duathlon option where it's like run, bike, and then you run again, that's a reasonable approach to and as an introduction into the sport. And if you cross that finish line and you really enjoyed it, then I think it's a little bit easier to make that commitment to learn how to swim, given the experience that you had at the race. And you're kind of like, you're getting closer to buying into the sport. I think that carries a lot of currency. There's a statement that I wanted to bring up, and is that the distance doesn't define the legitimacy of your race. The preparation does. And I'm guilty of this myself, is that, yes, I'm a multiple time Ironman finisher. And sometimes I will find myself referring to, I'm racing this year, but I'm only doing a half. So you're kind of discounting it, because it's a shorter distance race than what you've already accomplished. And I think it's kind of sad. I try to catch myself when I do that, as if, going a reduction from a full distance triathlon to a moderate distance to the 70.3, as if that's not going to be any harder or any easier. Each of these distances have their own nuances. So for a full distance triathlon, the intensity is a little bit lower. So you're on the bike for a full distance triathlon, you're on the bike for 112 miles at least. So the way that you have to ride that race is that you can't ride it like a cyclist. You have to ride it like a triathlete, because you have to run a marathon when you get off the bike. So the intensity is going to be lower. But for 70.3, it's half the distance. It's a 56-mile bike with a half marathon. So you can ride those 56 miles with higher intensity. So does that mean that the 70.3 is easier or less impressive than the full distance triathlon because the distance was shorter? No way, because the intensity in which you raced was higher. So you could make an argument that the sprint distance triathlon is one of the harder distances to race because you are racing it. Some of the strategies that we come up with, you're going full out redlining it the whole time. Now, if you're new to the sport, please, I don't recommend that approach. But if you are an experienced endurance athlete, you could make the case that the sprint distance triathlon is probably one of the harder distance race to do, because of the intensity in which you're executing that race is so much higher than the intensity that you execute for the longer distance races. Doesn't mean it's less impressive because it's a shorter distance. So if there's one thing that I can suggest, is that I would encourage you to start your journey and kind of let it build. And when I started, I did my first race, and it was, like I said, it was a duathlon. And I think I was like around 35, I think, is when I started. So I made the commitment to myself that by the time I'm 40 years old, I want to do a full distance triathlon. But I was only 35 at the time. So I gave myself 5 years to progress up the ranks of the sport. And I'm so thankful that I did that. My approach was, this year I'm going to I'm going to do a sprint, and I'm going to see if I like this. And I was like, loved it, finished the distance. So my goal the following year was, I was still going to do the sprint, but I wanted to see some growth. I wanted to see some improvement. Let's see if I can get faster. And then, did that happen? Yes or no? I can't quite remember, but the key is that once I kind of got into that second year, and that was my goal, then I felt justified and say, okay, this is my second year doing sprints, got faster. Let's step up to do an international or an Olympic. I just want to finish. That's my goal. So maybe I'll do a couple sprints in there as kind of like, just fine tuning races, just getting that race experience. And then my A race for that year was going to be an Olympic or an international distance, just to finish it, just to get the experience. And then the following year after that, I was like, I got the experience. Now let's see if I can grow. I want to do a couple more Olympic distance races, but I want to get faster. I want to get stronger. And that's how I kind of walked through my journey. And the following year, I was like, okay, I just want to try a 70.3 or a half distance triathlon, but I just want to finish. And then the next year I was like, okay, now that I've got the experience, where do I see areas of my training that I can improve on? What are some of my strengths that I can capitalize on? What are things that I need to improve on, my weaknesses? And then the following year, let's do a couple 70.3s and let's see if I can improve. And then that's when I felt justified to step up to the full distance. But there were times in that 5-year period where I had friends telling me, yeah, you're ready, go for it. But I knew that even if I could physically execute the race, I don't believe that I was mentally ready to execute that race, because race day is not just a physical feat. There's a big mental and emotional component to those longer distance races. And mental toughness is just as important as physical toughness. And I believe taking the time to develop that mental toughness is extremely valuable and yields a big return on investment when you start to get into these longer distance races. And I believe that you will be thankful for all of those previous experiences, all those things that you could draw on race day when things get hard and you start to question things. It's like, I don't know if I can do this. But then you can draw back. It's like, wait a minute, that stuff was hard and I did that. I know I can do this. But if you don't have that experience to draw on, it makes it a little bit harder, to convince yourself to keep going when your legs are tired and it's hot or it's cold and, you're just done. You're just burnt and you're trying to figure out how it is that you're going to finish off that race. Some of those past experiences matter greatly. So what I want to do is I want to invite you, the listeners, if you're tuning into this, share some of your background and some of your race plans and how you got started into the sport. This is going to be posted on YouTube as well as an episode of the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Send a message, leave a comment, write a review, whatever, and join the community and tell us what your experiences were like if you're getting into the sport, or if you're just now getting into the sport and you've just signed up for your race and you're excited. Post that as well. One thing that we're doing is we have a private Facebook group that's out there. It's called the Endurance Athlete Journey Podcast Group. You can go join the group. You answer one question and we'll let you right on in. And this is where you can post, your stories. Sometimes we'll bring on guests onto the podcast and, share the athlete stories and people that we meet and talk to. And so I think this is a really, really great avenue for you to get connected. If you're just starting your journey, you'll be able to learn from others, learn from other people's experiences, ask questions. I'm one of the co-hosts to the podcast. Coach Katie is the other one, and she is a registered dietitian and an extremely valuable resource to use if you're just now getting into endurance sports, because it's the fourth discipline of the sport of triathlon. You have swim, bike, run, nutrition. And I would say the fifth discipline is recovery. So there's the 5 pieces that I say make up the sport of triathlon. Even though there are only 3 sports that you're trying to master, there are other things that kind of play a significant role in. Joining this community gives you access to others who have gone this path. They've done the trial and error. They've seen what worked, what hasn't worked for them, and they can share those experiences with you. And those are extremely valuable to you if you're just now getting started. If you would like to reach out to me and you have questions or you want some help in how to progress along your journey, I'd love to talk to you. So like I said, my name is Coach Justin. I'm head coach and owner of Tabula Rasa Racing. You can go to the website. It's tabularasaracing.com, and you can message me from there. You can send an email or direct message. There's no shortage of ways to get a hold of me. We're all on social media, so you can look up Tabula Rasa Racing on Instagram and Facebook and check us out there. So I want to thank you for joining me in this first episode of Triathlon 101, where we talked about picking your race distance. The next episode 2, is going to be, do I have to be a good swimmer to do the sport of triathlon? So thank you guys for joining us. If you're listening to this on the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast, please consider sending us a review and a comment. If you are enjoying this content that's coming out, it's greatly appreciated, and we thank you. If you're listening to this and you've never heard of the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast, check us out. There is a YouTube channel as well where this video is a collaboration with them, and you can check out the website, and you'll find links to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. We have a whole library. We've got just shy of 60 episodes so far. There's tons of content out there to help you in your journey. I greatly, greatly appreciate you tuning in to Triathlon 101. Thank you so much. I've been your host, Coach Justin, head coach and owner of Tabula Rasa Racing, and your co-host of the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Thank you for joining. That's it for today's episode of Triathlon 101, a beginner's guide to triathlon, an Endurance Athlete Journey podcast series. Remember, you don't need to have everything figured out right now. Progress in triathlon comes from consistency, patience, and taking the right next step. If something you heard today sparked a question or gave you a little more confidence, that means you're moving in the right direction. Stick with this series as we continue breaking down triathlon one step at a time, building confidence before distance, and focusing on a process that actually fits real life. Until next time, trust the process, keep showing up, and remember, you're becoming an endurance athlete long before you ever cross that finish line.